Did you know 1 in 6 children face some kind of mental health concern each year? And help is too often in short supply, especially in rural parts of Idaho. This Thursday, September 26th, Boise State Public Radio is holding a special event in Marsing to talk about rural mental health issues, and we'd like to invite you to come, especially if you or someone you know lives or works in Owyhee or Canyon counties. The event is free and open to the public, and dinner will be provided. So meet us at Marsing High School this Thursday, September 26th from 6 to 8 p.m. for an important panel conversation on building connections between teens, families, and their support networks. Find event details at boisestatepublicradio.org/events.
From Boise State Public Radio, this is The Connector, Idaho's daily news. Good morning, I'm Michael Scherer. It's Friday, September 13th, and here are today's headlines. There are nearly 100 active craft breweries in Idaho, about 4 times as many as in 2012. But the industry is facing challenges. As Troy Oppie reports, changing tastes, discerning drinkers, and rising costs have many local breweries on a financial razor's edge. And tough times are spilling into Idaho's hop fields, too.
Beer, traditionally, is 4 ingredients: malted barley, hops, water, and yeast. In 2016, Idaho became the second largest hop producer in the country, surpassing Oregon. Driving into southern Idaho hop country west of Boise right now, you can see towering binds of hops ready for harvest.
We're just building up supply. Smells good in here as well.
Jeff Eider is sales manager at Mill 95, the state's only hop processor just off Highway 95 between Wilder and Parma. Hops give beer its bitterness, but also floral, dank, or even fruity flavors. In one building, workers are slicing open 200-pound bales of dried hops for processing into pellets. Those get bagged and vacuum sealed with nitrogen. Mill 95 has 2 football field-sized cold storage rooms on site as well. The harvest is just getting started, but it's much less hectic this year. In Idaho, hop acreage was reduced by 31%, more than any other state.
This is also another cold facility. I don't even know if we'll be using that this year because of the reduction in acreage and reduction of what we're processing this year.
That room is usually full too, Eider says, but the successes of previous years are actually part of the problem. Hops, if stored properly, can last up to 5 years. Data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture show between 175 and 193 million pounds of hops in storage each spring since 2020, the largest reserves ever.
Hopefully with some more acreage reduction that, we'll see some of that parity and some of that demand meeting supply and get back into balance. I'm optimistic that that'll happen, but it may be a few years.
Just a couple miles away, Michelle Gooding-Badiola of the Gooding Hop Farm says they have about 650 acres of hops this year. That's down about 40% from a peak just a few years ago. Corn, peppers, and seed crops are being grown instead, sometimes between the 18-foot-tall poles used to support hops.
You have to figure out what you can grow inside trellis if you think that it might go back into hops. But you also have to be realistic. If it's not going to go back, or maybe the trellis is old, or the ground needs to be rotated, you just need to make that decision and rip the Band-Aid off and move forward.
Other hop growers have pivoted to onions or potatoes, she says. Hops are perennial, and infrastructure and labor costs to change are significant. Gooding is an 8th-generation owner. Pivoting to grow other crops was new to her. But as a child, she says she remembers other tough times on the hop farm as the beer industry evolved.
Beer has changed a lot, and it's going to keep changing. I'll be 35 in a few weeks, and I feel like my group in particular has really kind of been all over the map.
They are drinking differently and drinking less. Gallup polling done last year showed weekly drinkers under the age of 35 fell from 72 to 62% since 2001. More older adults are drinking, according to that same poll, but there's also more options now. Dodds Hayden is CEO of Hayden Beverage, a distributor. He says their beer division has seen steady double-digit growth since about 2012.
Craft was certainly what gave us our big growth in the 2010s, and then the continuing craft wave and the seltzer wave really gave us our growth around that 2019-2020 time.
Seltzers, ciders, and now canned cocktails have been stealing sips from craft beer since in Idaho and nationwide. Bart Watson is chief economist at the Brewers Association, craft beer's national trade organization.
The industry was only down low single digits last year. I think that'll be a similar number this year.
Local breweries are watching the trends closely.
There's a lot of choice. I think the brand loyalty as a whole is not as big as it once was.
Mike Francis opened Payette Brewing in 2011. He says the volume of beverages he produces has stayed mostly the same in recent years, but it's not all beer anymore.
Our cocktails are now about, I want to say 15% of our volume, whereas 3 years ago it was 0.
Payette's responded to market changes by partnering with Colorado's Upslope Brewing. Payette beer will ultimately be brewed in Colorado. Payette will produce canned cocktails in Boise. The two brands will distribute beer and cocktails in both states.
The market's changing. If you're not changing, you're going to be in a bad spot. So what can we do?
Watson from the Brewers Association says those kind of partnerships are still rare but expected to grow as brewing operations making less beer than they used to look for ways to keep their tanks full. Colin Rudine is CEO and founder of community-owned Boise Brewing. His frustrations go beyond encroachment from trendy drinks like canned cocktails.
It feels like we're seeing less local support as well. Like when you go to a restaurant, 5-8 years ago, there was probably half the handles or more that were local, and now it's more like 30-40% local handles.
To be fair, Boise Brewing has its own restaurant. Several other breweries do as well. Craft beer drinkers are more educated now, says Hayden Beverage President Andy Mitchell, less forgiving of what they don't like and more discerning consumers as inflation has tightened wallets.
Maybe it's a time to be a little bit more conservative, make really high quality products that are really good value. And when I say value, I don't mean cheap. It's not about price, it's about value for price.
Rudine says Boise Brewing wants to do just that, focusing on its core beers and not chasing trends. He hopes discerning drinkers remember that buying local is the only way to ensure local breweries survive.
We've got 8 medals for nationally regarded competitions. So if you're talking quality and consistency, I can't speak to the industry as a whole, but for us, it's there.
Recently purchasing its own canning line will help Boise Brewing's margins, he says. But other breweries have found value in staying small. Bree Hovley co-owns Barbarian Brewing in Garden City. 95% of their beer is sold in their 2 tap rooms, which she says has allowed them to focus on quality and stay nimble as consumer tastes change.
We've always been pivoting, but it was hard when we started realizing our barrel-aged sour program was shifting because these are beers that have been sitting here for years. And now we're trying to pivot, but not waste or lose products.
She says the biggest pain point in Barbarian sales comes from ongoing construction in downtown Boise. Despite the headwinds, there remains an optimism around craft beer. The Brewers Association is helping breweries diversify their beverage offerings. It might be painful for some, but it's a normal competitive market now, says the BA's Watson.
This is not a bubble bursting. Craft brewers aren't going anywhere, but they are going to have to adapt to a new era, rising costs, increasing competition, and drinker preferences, which are always changing as they always have.
And back in the hop fields, Gooding says they'll push through the changes too.
You have to be mindful of the acreage and the hop stocks and, really being smart and strategic as an industry and as a business. There's definitely some new stuff coming though, and I think that's exciting for the industry.
Harvest might be slower this year, but brewers are still showing up excited to pick up unprocessed fresh hops for special beers they only brew this time of year. Drinkers should start seeing those on taps and store shelves in a week or two. Troy Oppie, Boise State Public Radio News.
The Boise State Broncos will play for the Pac-12 starting in 2026, as will several of its Mountain West rivals. James Dawson reports.
The Pac-12 has essentially been in a coma since all but 2 of its schools fled to other conferences over the past couple of years. Those 2 remaining schools, Oregon State and Washington State, have agreements to play the Mountain West through the rest of this year. Boise State Athletic Director Jeremiah Dickey says talks about joining the Pac-12 began shortly after the most recent agreement was signed in December.
When you look at the start of this week, I was not envisioning standing in front of you today. It escalated over the last 48 hours of this is happening. Are you in or are you out?
Colorado State, Fresno State, and San Diego State will join Boise State in leaving the Mountain West, which Dickey acknowledged will be an adjustment within the conference.
It's going to be an uncomfortable 2 years. We understand that.
Details on who would pay a reported $17 million exit fee to the Mountain West weren't immediately disclosed. The shift will require approval from the Idaho State Board of Education. James Dawson, Boise State Public Radio News.
This weekend, Boise is holding its 35th annual LGBTQ Pride Festival. Abigail Moody has details on what's new this year.
Kicking off this evening, Boise Pride will begin with the festival's first ever Trans March. Pride Director Donald Williamson says that's not the only new addition to the celebration.
For the first time in Boise Pride Festival's history, we're actually going to have live ASL interpreters on stage.
Interpreters will also be stationed at the info booth to help those with hearing impairments. Boise Pride has been held in September since the pandemic. Williamson says this has increased the number of attending artists and vendors while giving more rural and newer Pride events held in June a chance to grow.
Such a celebration of joy, and it's so great to see the community come together and to be able to share that with each other.
The Trans March will meet at 5:30 p.m. on 8th and Jefferson this evening, and festivities will continue through the weekend. Abigail Moody, Boise State Public Radio News.
Many places in our region don't have enough doctors. A federal program aims to fill the gaps by extending visas to international physicians. But a new analysis suggests many states in our region aren't doing as much as they could to get these physicians hired. The Mountain West News Bureau's Rachel Cohen has more.
The Conrad Visa program lets each state offer 30 visas a year to international medical graduates who want to stay in the U.S. after residency. As a result, 18,000 doctors were hired over a 2-decade period ending in 2020.
That's the largest physician recruitment program in this country.
But Hao Yu, a professor at Harvard Medical School who led the analysis, says half of states aren't filling all their allocated visas. In our region, Arizona utilized more than 90% of its allowance, Colorado filled a third, and Idaho just 4%.
That's really a minimum level, almost doing nothing.
Yu says this is surprising because the program could be a tool towards solving physician shortages. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Rachel Cohen.
Officials were in Las Vegas this week announcing major clean energy projects. While supporting the transition, some activists say newly relaxed rules could harm the environment. Yvette Fernandez reports for the Mountain West News Bureau.
Significant changes to the Western Solar Plan were proposed. The update increases the number of acres allocated for solar projects by 40%. This opens more than 31 million acres of public lands across 11 western states. The Center for Biological Diversity says some of the locations are too close to sensitive areas. Some potentially harm plants and animals. Others could impact scenic locations like the Great Basin National Park in Nevada and the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Randy Spivak is the center's policy director.
You know, if the BLM hears that this plan needs some course correction here before it's finalized to really make it right, I think that'll be very important.
The Center for Biological Diversity will submit a protest document detailing its proposed environmental safeguards. The BLM can incorporate or reject these before it issues its final decision. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Yvette Fernandez.
The Idaho State Fire Marshal's Office has completed its investigation into the cause of the fire that destroyed the Wolf Lodge Inn near Coeur d'Alene at the beginning of September. It was determined that a breach in the flue pipe above the kitchen's wood-fired grill allowed an accumulation of grease to form on the flue piping and inside the attic. This buildup of grease ignited and spread to the remainder of the building. The fire was classified as accidental. And that's today's episode of The Connector. I'm Michael Scherer, and we'll see you back here Monday. To stay in touch with the news between now and then, check out boisestatepublicradio.org or download the free Boise State Public Radio app. Thanks for listening.